everybody, and welcome back to our conference, Evicted by Greed, Global Finance, Housing and Resistance. And we are now starting with the keynote, the human rights solution, tackling the housing crisis. My name is Lieke Ploeger. I'm directing the community program of the Disruption Lab. And we're very happy to have this keynote today because we're bringing in conversation Leilani Farha, who's the global director of The Shift and the former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing, a position she's actually held since 2014, so she will have a lot to say from that. And Justus von Daniels, who's the editor-in-chief of CORRECTIV. So they will be discussing today how civil society can be directly involved in fighting real estate speculation, and also which measures can be adopted to guarantee the right to adequate housing on a global scale. And just to remind everybody of how it works with this online conference, we also have a chat, which you can access via our website. And you can participate there with any comments you have or links to other resources you want to share. And of course, you can also ask questions to our speakers. And it would be great if you can post already your questions during the talk and not all towards the end, because we are trying to collect them and then we can post them in the moment of Q&A with the audience. And also, of course, you're happy and welcome to introduce yourself in the chat, because we're also interested to hear where everybody's coming from who's joining us today. So yeah, we hope to see you also online there. So I will briefly introduce Justus von Daniels. He's the editor-in-chief of CORRECTIV, which is the first German language-based non-profit newsroom. And he joined CORRECTIV in 2015 as an investigative reporter. He leads the long-term crowd-based project Who Owns the City, which so far has run in 9 cities in Germany with local media partners. And before he joined CORRECTIV, Justus worked as a freelance journalist for Tagesspiegel and Die Zeit. And he's a trained lawyer and worked also 2 years as a postdoc in New York and Princeton. So yeah, welcome Justus, and handing over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting us as CORRECTIV to this conference. And I think this panel shows your fascinating work to make this possible in these strange times. So you put everybody together in Berlin, in Ottawa, and the audience wherever everybody sits. And I think this is a wonderful thing that you still made this possible. So I just want to thank you very, very much because the housing crisis, was kind of overwhelmed, of course, like many, many other important topics right now by COVID-19, obviously, but it's still a pressuring and very important topic. I think the last 2 years were kind of very decisive for the housing crisis discussion or for the debate, because in the last 2 years there was a lot of efforts and also like some first successes to analyze the housing market, which was mainly unknown for most of us. Who is behind all this, the housing market, but also like in triggering the first changes to change the way how the housing market is organized. So from our perspective, before COVID-19, there was kind of a momentum to trigger change or to work for really structural changes in the housing market, I think in Germany, like in many other countries, because many different sides organized in the housing market understood that there's something to do, that we cannot really let this market be as it is. So I think this debate today, in this weekend, but also like in the near future, should actually take up this momentum again and to take it to the next steps, because this is now the time. So I'm a journalist, so my perspective actually on this topic is, of course, to uncover stories. But our understanding as a journalist for CORRECTIV, which is a non-profit newsroom, is also like to kind of provide the public with information in context, with the aim of enabling the public discourse. So making it simple, with more information, we can act better. So this is kind of our perspective why we actually started projects like Who Owns Berlin and Who Owns, like in 8 other cities where we still are working. So we will hear a little bit in this panel about this, but I think it will be much more important today, it would be my wish actually, if we could actually concentrate on a debate how to organize this change now. So what are the key questions and who are the key figures to ask or to demand changes? And I think it would be very, very helpful if we can take some steps into this direction. And that's why I'm so glad that we have not only a very local perspective, which is our perspective, but a really global perspective, which is the perspective of Leilani Farha, which is here today, and so who worked for 6 years as the United Nations Rapporteur for the housing market. So she knows on a global scale where the problems are, the overlapping problems, but also like the differences. And I think it would be very nice if we can find, some elements which are similar in the markets. And I think you found, Leilani, you have a very strong voice on the topic of financialization of the housing market. And I'm pretty sure that this is a very, very important topic. I'm actually very curious about to hear what you have to say. So I would like to hand over to you for a short statement from your side.
Thank you very much. And first of all, thanks to the organizers for, as Justus said, making sure this conference happened regardless of the coronavirus. I actually was saying we were having a little chat before we went live, and I was saying that this conference was the highlight for me of 2020, and it still is the highlight for me of 2020. I think back to when I was first appointed rapporteur, and the idea of such a conference was impossible. I mean, the conversation was just not happening to the same extent that it is now. The knowledge base has deepened immensely. I mean, people have been working on these issues for some time and researching, but the knowledge base is quite deep now and quite varied from country to country. It's not just one or two countries now. There are many research activities going on around the financialization of housing and the housing crisis in many countries around the world. We're in a different landscape, and this conference is suggestive of that. That we've reached a new consciousness and a new awareness that we have to really start coming together and challenging what's happening. So just a huge applause for the organizers. I guess I want to say a few things. As I said, the financialization of housing, or the treatment of housing as a financial instrument, a commodity, a way to leverage capital, a way to park capital or hide capital or grow capital. This financialization of housing has become understood as very much part of the housing landscape in cities around the world. And really, it is a global phenomenon. As rapporteur, I had the privilege to really have the global stage as mine. And I realized everywhere I went, this was playing itself out. It looks different in different contexts, rest assured. What I saw in Egypt is different from what I see in, for example, Berlin or Barcelona. What I saw in New Zealand, surprisingly, was quite different than what I see in Western Europe, for example, or in North America. Even though everyone knows New Zealand has like one of the hottest real estate markets in the world, it's not the same financial actors. So it's quite interesting, but the phenomenon repeats itself in just different ways, and it manifests differently. I'm very happy that there is this growing awareness. And even in my own country, in Canada, when I first became rapporteur, no one was talking about this issue. And now it's just par for the course that this would be part of how we discuss the housing crisis in this country. What I see a little less of is an understanding of how global this phenomenon really is. And not just that it's happening around the world, but that the actors are truly global actors. So I still see let's say, local communities struggling with who they call a landlord. And I mean, I actually refuse the term landlord when we're dealing with an asset management firm or a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm or a multi-billion-dollar pension fund. These are not landlords. These are financial actors. They're big capital. But I still hear communities referring that way. They don't always know how big the actor is right away. And that the actor is itself global. So the phenomenon is global, but the actors are global as well. And so we still need to understand that. And for me, that's why we also need a global response. This plays itself out locally, so we need a local response. And the grassroots activism around this is essential. We won't make change without that. But we also need a global response. And that's why I started the shift, the global movement to secure the right to housing. It was that motivation. A global phenomenon, global actors, global response that draws on all of the amazing local activism that's happening, that uses that as its understanding and its base. The second thing I don't see so much, and we can talk much more about this later, but I don't see enough human rights concern. And that's the game changer here, in fact, because while, dirty money or money that needs to be hidden is a problem, and tax evasion is a problem, where real estate is being used to hide money or where real estate is being used to leverage money and grow money, we're in a different ballgame, because housing, unlike other things where money can be hidden, is a human right. And that changes the nature of what we're talking about entirely, in my opinion. Because when you enter the domain of a human right, governments have different obligations and responsibilities. They have legal obligations and commitments that they've made by ratifying international human rights law. And so where I really want us to move is to an understanding of why this is so what makes it different when money is hid in gold versus when money is hid in housing, or when money is made off of steel, when money is made off of housing. And there is a difference, and the difference is what governments can do and what they're obliged to do. But we can get into more of that later. I'll end there.
All right. Thanks so much, Leilani. And also from our side, we're so happy to have you with us today at the conference, even though it is virtually, but we're very excited to have you here for the keynote. So before we're going to show the keynote, which is actually a recorded video that Leilani made for us, we will first show also an introductory video that Justus von Daniels made. And this is about an important project that CORRECTIV has been working on, which is the German crowdsourced project, like Justus already mentioned, Who Owns Berlin? It was also run in 8 other cities, and it's based on community-powered investigations that are collecting data to gain a better understanding of the German housing market. So over to the video of Justus.
Hi, thank you very much for attending this session, in which I will give you a short tour on our journalistic investigation, in which we involved thousands of citizens to answer a fairly simple question, which is, who owns the city? We did this project in various cities in Germany already. So just to give you an example, we did this in Hamburg already. We did went to cities like Düsseldorf, even smaller cities like Lüneburg. And of course, we also did this investigation in Berlin. So this shows this project, Who Owns Berlin, should serve as an example in this session to tell you a little bit more why we actually involved all these citizens, what we achieved, and what were the consequences of our investigation. The housing market crisis, as you all know much better than we do, is a global phenomenon. It affects all corners of the world, from the large cities in the United States, like San Francisco, New York, Europe, even smaller cities. It affects people in Asia, so it's everywhere. But it has always different local implications and local challenges. The reason for the housing market crisis are manifold. I think one major reason, which is undisputed, was the financial crisis in 2008 and 2009. So after this crisis, the financial market looked for new ways to invest money, and the attractive housing market in the cities especially was a very stable and profitable way to invest a lot of money. So there was a huge influx of money in the cities. On the other side, there was hardly any control by the local authorities what this means or how this money actually affects the market. Because on the one side, if you have like a lot of companies who are expecting a lot of profits, you have on the other side people living in the apartments which are affected very, very directly by these kind of profits, because profits in the housing market are only possible if rent prices are rising and property prices are rising. This is something you all know, so I don't want to go into this deeper, but want to tell you a little bit more about the local implications and the local challenges here in Germany. In Germany, unlike in other European countries, we have a very peculiar situation because there's a huge intransparency of the housing market. This is due to a lack of openness of the land registry. So there's no public access to the land registry in Germany, and we have a very poorly developed transparency register for companies. So it is in Germany more or less unknown who is actually in the housing market, which kind of companies are in the housing market. So this is not only a problem for the public, that we cannot hold companies accountable for if they do something which they're not supposed to, but it's also a problem for the local authorities, for the cities, who just don't know who is actually investing money in their market. So in these cities, the local authorities don't really know the ratio, how many state-owned companies, institutional investors, private investors are in a city. They cannot really follow if there are hints on money laundering or tax avoidance. They cannot really follow and punish companies or persons who are in this field of wrongdoings. So for them, it is very hard to know about, but it's also like for the public, more or less impossible to get into a political dialogue how to regulate the housing market, because if you don't know who is in the housing market, you cannot really take political steps or discuss concrete measures to do this. So this was mainly the reason why we as a journalist thought, we need more transparency, not only because it's important for our work, but it's also important for the general public. As we cannot really find out more about the land registries, we had to go and find other ways how to learn more about the structure of the market, of the ownership in the cities. So that's why we came up with the idea, why not asking the tenants who live in the apartments, who know who the owner of the apartment is, and to gather as much information as possible, so we can actually investigate and also publish stories based on the knowledge of the citizens. For us as CORRECTIV, this was not a new strategy, because we developed a platform a couple of years ago, which is called the Crowd Newsroom, which is an online platform designed to get structured information. So what we actually try to do is asking the people not only for in a form of a survey for information about ownership, but also like asking them to upload proof of their information. We started this project, Who Owns the City, about 2 years ago. Now we are in many cities. You see this, so it's like 9 cities in total at the moment. But the biggest project we did was the project on Berlin. So Who Owns Berlin? Berlin, of course, is a very dynamic market. It's especially interesting because the prices of apartments used to be pretty low, like 15 years ago, but there was a steep rise in the last 10 years. So rent prices went up like 100%. If you wanted to get a new apartment, and you had a lot of new players coming into the city because it was so attractive for investments. To do a project like this, this kind of crowdsourcing, is more than just gathering information from the citizens. We also wanted to get the citizens involved in a long-term debate about the shape of their city, how to regulate the city, how to actually demand political measures from the politicians. So we actually went out on the streets, organized public debates. In other cities, we organized picnics with mayors. We opened up newsrooms in stores. So we tried to be accessible as possible to the citizens, but also to engage them into debates which they are then leading. So it was a kind of a 2-tier project. So to get the citizens involved into something, but also to ask them for valuable information. We ask actually quite a lot from them, because we ask them to prove the information they give us. We ask them to upload a copy of the rent contract, or of a document which actually shows who is the owner of the apartment. We ask them to share stories which they had. So there was actually quite a lot of involvement of these people. And in Berlin, we were able to get, more or less about 4,000 participants in the crowd newsroom who actually gave us information about their situation. So here you can see how the crowd newsroom looks from its side. So from the internal, from the side of for the journalist, you see that we get a structured information we work with, and over a couple of months we set up a team of both newsrooms, CORRECTIV and Tagesspiegel, to go through these data and to try to get a bigger picture about the market structure in Berlin, and to kind of distill some stories out of this, which actually explain a little bit about the market structure. So I will give you 4 examples of what we did. So one was the example of anonymity. So we actually found out that we have had several entries which gave a similar name of names of companies which looked quite similar but were not the same. We got hints from a tenant initiatives that there might be a company behind it which owns more than 40 companies in Berlin which own houses, but which are not known to be one company, and the owner is far away, behind a cascade of other companies in offshore countries. So we, with these hints, we went to the land registry, and we were able to trace all the apartments of all the companies which looked similar, and we found out there were about 3,000 apartments here in Berlin owned by a similar structure of companies. The second team traced back these companies and could find that they were all kind of traceable to offshore companies back in the British Virgin Island. And we had, through a coincidence, we really could find out who is the owner of the offshore company in the British Virgin Islands. So we could actually show, in this case, how anonymity works and how easy it is to hide the fact that you can be an owner, one of the biggest owner of apartments in Berlin, but nobody actually knows about. A second story we did was about the large owners in Berlin. So the largest companies. We actually measured the 10 to 15 the largest companies in Berlin, which own most apartments, and we tried to compile or find all the companies which are sub-companies of these large companies, and we provided a service to the reader that they could type in their owner of their apartment and try to find out if this company is actually a part of one of the real large housing owners in Berlin, so that you can see actually how big these big companies actually are, even if they are because sometimes they don't appear in all the rental contracts as the mother company. Another story was based on the institutional investors. This was especially interesting because it shows something about the economic structure, how the market works in this peculiar way. So the institutional investors, like pension funds or insurance companies, are shareholders of other companies, of housing companies. And we could show that the big pension funds, for example, have shares in all the big housing companies. So that's actually a big network, which is which goes back to a very small amount of shareholders. But who are behind these shareholders? So if a pension fund is investing money, they are investing money for normal people like you and me who might have pension fund. So this story was also about to show the effect that we are also in an intermediate way demanding the profits and are kind of raising, are also like participants of this market. Another case was the role of the state-owned companies. So in Germany, you have a lot of the cities own apartment companies, housing companies. Through a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests, we could find out how big they are, in which neighborhoods they have their apartments, but also which properties the cities is actually selling to private investors for developing new buildings. So in Hamburg, for example, we could show that there was one property for 2 new buildings, which was sold for 40 million euro to a private company. Why was this peculiar or special? Because Hamburg officially states that they want to sell these state properties to companies which give a kind of sustainable concepts to develop apartments. But in this case, and as many other cases, we can prove that they just sold this for the highest bid. Of course, it was a very, very huge company who actually bought this very, very small property for 40 million euro. We did this investigation in Berlin, but we also did it now in 9 cities, and in all cities, it had different implications, different results, led to different kinds of debates. But it was very, very important to do this project on a local basis, because you can really see the differences between the cities and also the needs, what to regulate. So in Berlin, you can see that there's a demand to regulate not only the kind of transparency issues, but also to regulate the markets in terms of controlling money laundering, also like tax avoidance in other cities. It was about other aspects of regulation. So this project shows actually how it can be used for every city, not only in Germany, to shed some light on these particular issues in the particular market of a city. What can we actually learn from this participatory approach? We can learn that you could actually bring a kind of a flashlight into these cities, not only a torch by having a very specific investigation, but also like to show a little bit more about the market structure as a whole. And we can see that in Germany, for example, there's a huge demand, of course, to regulate, to control and regulate the real estate market, but also to tackle the problems of tax avoidance, also to discuss, the role of institutional investors. You can do all this, but this can only be done on the basis of knowledge, of facts, of information. And this is something I think we can take from this project, is that you need transparency to actually get the people and the public into a political debate, so they can actually discuss the right measures, how to tackle all these problems around the housing market crisis. So I hope I could give you some insights into this project and why actually we ask so many citizens to participate. So I hope this could work as an inspiration for other similar projects as well. And I hope you enjoy this fascinating conference. Thank you very much for your patience. Great. So I'm just continuing. I just realized that I have the same shirt on, although this has been recorded a long time ago. Sorry. So I would like to take this little tour from a local to a global level, Leilani. So so what we saw in our project, we saw a lot of local initiatives who were working with us, but we also discovered a lot of initiatives, and they even didn't know which other local initiatives also exist in Berlin. So it was really, really fascinating to see what kind of great work they do. They are most of them have troubles with their landlords, but still they invest so much energy and time in trying to find out or trying to improve their situation. But what we really saw with these initiatives, most of them are very small. Most of them have very particular problems, and some of them are a little desperate. What to achieve, where to turn to, what to do. So that was a very interesting and very important observation, I think, which we made. You mentioned in your initial statement the human rights dimension of the housing market. I would like to ask you what kind of advice you would like to, or you would give to these small local initiatives, how they can actually turn their demands into actual policy, how they can turn their little observations into bigger solutions, and where the issue of human rights actually comes in, because I think it's so essential, because it has been overlooked in the debate for so long that housing is a human right. There is an article in the United Nations Convention But I'm wondering how this kind of can be translated into something. So that would be actually my question to you
Sure.
on this.
Sure. Thanks, Justus. First of all, I need to say your work and the work of the collective is phenomenal. And in actual fact, it should be scaled up across the world. I mean, I love your work from beginning to end, because it wasn't just, can I call up some academics and get them, or property law lawyers, and get them to figure out who owns the city, which was one, you could have gone that route. But this galvanizing everyday people and relating this back to them and getting them engaged is amazing. And I really just really huge kudos to you and your colleagues and those who support you, because I'm already thinking, okay, how I have a project in Canada about bringing the human right to housing to the local level. What does that look like? And already I know that one of the things now I'm going to make sure happens is some local audits. And I would include, that's my short form for what you are doing, but who owns the city? And then also what we don't have in Canada, for example, is an audit of empty units. Who owns the empty units and how many empty units? We don't have this. We don't have these numbers at our fingertips. So that's just my preambular. So a huge thanks, and I hope we will continue to be in conversation so I can keep learning from you. It's such a good question, and I will say, as rapporteur and in my advocacy life before and after, often what happens is you hear of these very small, what seem like small issues, the minutia of being a tenant. My landlord doesn't clean the hallway. My landlord is spraying insecticide and it's bad for the tenants, and the issues seem very micro. And one of the things, of course, that we need tenants to start doing is to find out who their landlords are. So that's the first step. And the minute you do that, and you realize that in fact your landlord is a corporate entity, this huge actor, it does immediately change a tenant's feeling about their situation. It sometimes makes them feel smaller, actually. I do think it's really important to link the personal experience with the structural issue, because often there's a structural issue at play. Mostly what I hear from tenants is that their rent is going up for a variety of reasons and they can't afford to live there anymore. And that's a key aspect of the right to housing, is affordability under international human rights law. So then you open up the human rights analysis that way. So it's like, for example, when I hear about these cases of Achilles and many others, Blackstone and Starlight, and I mean, there's so many, Vonovia, I often hear the first issue is affordability. The second issue is habitability. In other words, often the owner will make it unpleasant to live in the accommodations through construction and hostile kind of environment. Heavy fines and fees for everything. If you do anything wrong, you put a plant in the wrong place, you can be fined in some places by these corporations. So all of that is a habitability issue, also an element of human rights. And so then your analysis it lifts up from the minutia and it becomes a little bit more structural. There are, in fact, mechanisms within the UN human rights system that people can use, NGOs can use to hold governments accountable. But at that very micro level for the tenant, sometimes it's easier to just go to local government and say, we have human rights. Here's what's happening. How do you justify? Because you, as a local government, have international human rights obligations too. And so that's sometimes much easier for tenants to do. But tenants have to come together. It's very difficult for one tenant to do. It has to be through a tenant association or groupings of tenants, because there you find solidarity and you realize, it's not my personal failure that has me in this situation. Housing is a weirdly intimate and private thing. People are very embarrassed when their housing isn't proper. They think it's because of something they've done. It's a strange thing. I've learned that over this 6 years for sure. People are very humiliated when their housing isn't great, even though it has nothing to do with themselves. So I'm going to stop there because I think I'm out of time for the answer.
Right. Okay. Maybe we take this as a good point to show your statement and to your keynote, so we can actually transpose the whole debate into a global scale.
I'm Leilani Farha, the Global Director of The Shift and the former UN Special Rapporteur on the right to housing. The Shift is a global movement to secure the right to housing, and it's undertaken in partnership with the UN Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, as well as with an international network of cities and local governments called UCLG. Our aim is to get governments, private actors, advocates, and others to shift and embrace housing as a human right and challenge housing's commodification. I'm so disappointed that the Evicted by Greed conference is not proceeding in a face-to-face manner. I do hope that we can convene sometime at the end of 2020 or in 2021. The global pandemic has presented us with a central contradiction. On the one hand, COVID-19 makes everything that came before it seem somehow irrelevant. And on the other hand, COVID-19 lays bare that everything that came before the virus must now be addressed if society is going to survive. And this is particularly so in the area of housing. Let me begin by talking about what came before COVID-19. In fact, let's go all the way back to the 60s and the 70s, when housing was viewed quite differently than it is today. During that time, in many countries around the world, housing was viewed as something that could provide individuals and families with security, with personal security, but not necessarily with wealth. Governments played an active role in housing through legislation and policy, ensuring that a variety of housing options were available to those with diverse household incomes. So home ownership was available, rental accommodation, and public or subsidized or social housing were all options. Homelessness and the unaffordability of housing as known now did not really exist back then, and certainly didn't exist on today's scale. Without painting too rosy a picture, housing was generally understood as a social good, and it was aligned with an understanding that housing is a human right for all, a place to live in dignity. Fast forward to 2018. Global real estate represents nearly 60% of the value of all global assets. And residential real estate is now big business. In fact, it's the biggest business of all businesses, valued at $163 trillion US, which is almost 3 times the total of the entire world's GDP taken together. Housing is now invaded by financial actors, banks, asset management firms, pension funds, private equity firms, shareholders, and rich individuals, all of whom view housing predominantly as a place to park excess capital, of which there is an abundance. What's particularly disturbing is that much of this investment preys on the misfortune of others. Private equity firms have been circling the world looking for cheap debt that they can buy at a discount, debt that comes out of foreclosures, for examples. They're looking for underprivileged or undervalued neighborhoods sitting on land that they think could be more highly valued. And why do they do this? For guaranteed returns, profit, money. Let me give you an example. Take Blackstone, the world's largest private equity firm with $100 billion of real estate in their portfolio. Blackstone has bought up thousands and thousands of foreclosed homes and affordable rental apartments in the US, Spain, Ireland, parts of Eastern Europe, the UK, etc. They now have a controlling interest in India's main mortgage lending company. Blackstone knows that getting into rental real estate in particular is a brilliant bet, far more secure than owning residential mortgages, actually, especially during an economic crisis, because there will always be renters who pay their rent, and that will always provide a stream of income for investors. Blackstone's business model necessitates the charging of high rents because they have to make sure their properties generate enough profit to satisfy investors. This means buying buildings where rents remain relatively affordable, and then with or without modest improvements, they increase rents, circumnavigating rent caps and other legislation aimed at protecting tenants, forcing, in fact, low-income tenants out of their homes by increasing rents and replacing them with more affluent ones, all in the name of capital growth for a few. And of course, Blackstone could be replaced with Achilles, Vonovia, Timber Creek, the Credit Suisse. There are so many of these actors using that very same model or a very similar model to that of Blackstone. And to state the obvious, the interests here lie with the investor. The investor is the client, not the tenant. Of course, pre-COVID, there were other ways in which housing has been financialized. It's now well documented that Airbnb and other short-term platforms have encouraged the buying up of apartment buildings and units throughout cities to turn them into short-term rental accommodation to maximize profits off of the property. This then results in a reduction of the amount of available housing stock that could be used for long-term affordable rents for people who are actually living on a long-term basis in cities. A study of Airbnb in New York, for example, showed a loss of up to 13,500 units of housing from its long-term rental market. That's a city where 130,000 people are homeless throughout the year. And of course, another kind of financialization is the billionaires or individuals of ultra high net worth who park or hide their money in housing too. Millions of dollars float undercover from one island bank account to another, eventually landing securely in a piece of residential real estate, a starchitecturally designed condo in the sky, a mansion, a villa, a house in which the lights are never turned on. Millions of investor-owned homes stand vacant across the world, with their owners having no intention of setting foot in them. In the borough of Kensington and Chelsea in London, there are reportedly 1,400 vacant homes. This is the same borough where the Grenfell Tower fire occurred, where hundreds of people were left homeless well after the fire. Skyrocketing housing prices mean that those who sustain cities are being pushed out. School teachers, firefighters, students, police officers, nurses and doctors, garbage collectors, the employees of your local cafe. And the risk of allowing cities to continue on this path is that they will become monocultural, as Saskia Sassen warns. In my opinion, many cities and parts of cities have begun to resemble sterile airports, lined with multinational stores which lack any particular cultural relevance, populated only by those who can afford to be there and who come and go, but who don't stay. So where are governments in all of this? Governments are now closely aligned with the investment sector. They provide tax subsidies for home ownership, tax breaks for investors. They even give citizenship and visas to foreign investors who buy property. And they either back or bail out banks and financial institutions. And they give preferential tax status to institutional investors who want to invest in residential real estate. All of these supports far outstrip any support for residents who are renters. In Canada, for example, in a study from a few years ago, 93% of housing subsidies provided by the government went to homeowners, and just 7% went to renters. What's so troubling about this, of course, is that in many countries, renters have far lower incomes on average than homeowners, and yet it's the higher income households and the investors receiving the bulk of the subsidies. While governments support home ownership, they have in fact divested themselves of rental housing. They have sold off social and public housing stock and land as an asset and are relying on the private market to meet the housing needs of low-income and middle-income households. Now, I want to be clear that the decision by governments to support housing as a commodity rather than housing as a social good is not just any old policy decision. It's an actual rejection of their commitment to international human rights law, which they have signed, ratified, and committed to. In particular, it's a rejection of their obligations with respect to the right to adequate housing. Understanding and applying a human rights approach to housing and its financialization is distinguished by this fact. Governments commit to human rights. They're legal commitments. They sign on to human rights treaties. They have legal obligations as a result. And therefore, they are accountable to human rights. And they must be and can be held accountable. And that's what distinguishes a human rights approach to the financialization of housing and what makes it so potentially powerful. It's this issue of accountability. So where can we hold governments accountable? Well, we can use the United Nations human rights system. We can use courts. We can use parliamentary processes. We can use local mechanisms that cities are establishing and other democratic spaces we can take to the streets. We can use journalists and the media. To understand the damage done by allowing the financialization of housing and for these actors to dominate the housing market, and in order to understand what must be done to correct the situation and to hold states accountable, then you have to know something about what the right to adequate housing means and what states have actually committed to. At its most zoomed out and basic, the right to housing is the right to live somewhere in peace, security, and with dignity. There are also several characteristics that must be present in order for housing to be adequate under international human rights law. Affordability is a key component of adequate housing under international human rights law. And there it's defined as being commensurate with household income. That's what would make housing affordable. If it was commensurate with household income, it is not based on what the market can bear. So when corporate landlords set rents at rates that their tenants cannot afford, they violate the affordability measure of the right to housing. And when states fail to protect tenants from rising rents and from unaffordability, they are failing to comply with their international human rights obligations. Security of tenure is also a key component of adequate housing under international human rights law. That is, no one should live in fear that they're going to lose their housing for any reason. Obviously, landlords raising rents so that they are unaffordable to tenants would contravene a tenant's sense of security and their security of tenure, as would government failure to protect tenants from being evicted for non-payment of rent when rents have been escalated an extraordinary amount. Asset management firms like Acalius are known for creating very inhospitable conditions for tenants through construction projects. Tenants of Acalius buildings have told me, for example, that they believe Acalius uses construction conditions as a way to drive out tenants. And once the tenants have been driven out and the unit is vacant, it's much easier for Acalius to then raise the rents. Governments that stand idly by, despite these allegations, and only attribute rent caps or freezes to apartments that are actually inhabited by tenants are failing to meet habitability standards under international human rights law. Allowing an apartment building to become a construction site for months on end, or even years in some cases, undermines the notion of habitability, which is part of a commitment governments have made with respect to the right to adequate housing. Housing must be habitable. I'll also note that evictions into homelessness are strictly forbidden under international human rights law, and yet I have heard of countless tenants whose rents were raised astronomically upon sale of their building to a corporate landlord and were thus rendered homeless. Governments that don't prevent that from happening and courts that don't prevent that from happening are contravening international human rights obligations, and we must hold them accountable. I think this COVID era is the time to make a shift. As so many people before me have said, and as so many more will say, we are clearly living in unprecedented times. COVID has already created a remarkable shift across society in virtually every way in which we live our lives. The COVID crisis is exposing the many reasons a seismic shift in approach to housing is necessary. And it's exposing how it's actually possible to make this shift, a shift whereby the value of housing is home, not equity, and where people, not capital, are the primary investment. So let me highlight 5 ways in which the COVID crisis is exposing that a shift is necessary and possible. First of all, home has been exposed as the frontline defense against the deadly virus. Governments around the world and the World Health Organization have implemented stay-at-home policies, recognizing the value of home in protecting against a deadly virus like COVID-19. Homelessness and housing precarity put everyone, entire populations, at risk of contracting the disease and of the disease spreading. So in other words, COVID exposes that having an adequate home is the difference between life and death. Governments around the world have shown they can play a significant role in housing systems when they choose to, and they can be accountable to tenants. Governments the world over have enacted moratoriums on evictions. They've suspended or reduced rents in some cases. They've deferred mortgage payments. They've provided rental supplements. They've provided water and sanitation to people living in informal settlements and encampments. And they have managed to find, when they said it was never possible before, they have managed to find temporary housing for homeless people. Now, a lot of people are suffering economically. Europe's economy is set to shrink by 7.5%. That's 3% more than it shrunk during the global financial crisis. In the US, something like 30 million people have applied for unemployment benefits. And many across the globe simply cannot afford to pay their rent or soon will not be able to do so. It's unlikely that housing could be profitable in these circumstances or should be profitable in these circumstances. People are suffering. Now is the time to ensure they have a secure place to live. Now is not the time to ensure that investors are getting a good return on their investments. A profit-based system, in my opinion, is completely out of step with where we are at economically as a world, across the planet. And I think governments have to pay heed to the actual economic reality we're in right now and not project into the future at this point. My fourth point is that with many unable to pay their rent and with interests very low, the pandemic will likely result in many distressed assets coming onto market. That makes them very desirable to private equity and other big capital, and thus to more financialization. The Wall Street Journal said in April that this might be a once-in-a-generation opportunity to buy distressed assets at bargain prices. The CEO of Blackstone, Steve Schwarzman, recently said, "Every day it's becoming a better day to buy assets with people experiencing unexpected difficulties." But distressed assets don't have to be sold to the private bidder. Governments should flex their newfound confidence in the housing sector and start buying these assets themselves. It would be a fast way to make up for public assets governments have sold off over the last decades. These newly purchased units could be used to house people who are homeless, those living in housing precarity with low incomes, young people. They could be social housing or deeply affordable housing. And my final point is that the idea of returning to an understanding of housing as home is actually not a radical idea at all. It is only asking governments to do what should have been done prior to the pandemic, to effectively implement the right to adequate housing. It's only asking governments to ensure housing security and affordability for tenants. It's only asking governments to house people who are homeless and to ensure no one becomes homeless because of the pandemic. These are simple human rights obligations that apply before, during, and after a crisis of this nature. I fear, however, that though a return to housing as a human right is not radical, I fear this shift will not be easy. As the pandemic resolves itself, there will be a tendency to want to return to normal by governments and by others, Many states have already based their recovery plans on normal, with some having hired BlackRock, not to be confused with Blackstone, one of the largest investment firms in the world, as a chief advisor. Though this is a very strange time to be leading a global movement, strange because it's hard to feel global from my home here in Ottawa, it is the perfect time to scale up the shift.
Thank you so much, Leilani, for this fascinating talk on bringing the dimension of human rights into the housing market, which is, I think, very, very clear to us now. And you know, from one point of view, I would say now it's easy to take some new steps. We just have to infer the human right to housing in every political question. So that seems to be easy, of course. Before I would start the Q&A session, we have like a little bit more than 20 minutes, and I would like to encourage everyone, if there's any questions, to post them now, because that's a wonderful moment to get into conversation with Leilani about all these issues. I would like to ask one question relating to these human rights issues. Because my question to this would be, that the Human Rights Convention, the biggest obstacle is the enforceability of the rights on this global scale. And you made some examples, but I think now to tackle or to give some very concrete ideas what to do is, I would like to ask you, what would be the biggest wheels to turn right now with the arguments of human rights to really achieve a change on the housing market? So give some examples which might be on the global or in the local level, where we can infer the right to housing, enforce it.
Yeah, I think you rightly justify the most difficult aspect in all of this, which is enforceability. And, as rapporteur, I had the opportunity to speak with many governments at many levels. And there's often a lot of head nodding when I say housing is a human right. Oh, yes. And it means A, B, and C. Oh, yes. And then I say, and you also have to ensure accountability mechanisms and enforcement mechanisms. Oh, and then it's like the conversation drops, So you're absolutely right. Because governments fear, they fear all sorts of things. I mean, I think they fear a dismantling of the structures that are so inherent in so many, both developing and developed economies. Residential real estate as a commodity is fundamental to so many economies. If you look at like the percentage of GDP that is taken up by this general area, it's like up like 20% of GDPs often. That's a huge percentage of the GDP. And so there's a lot of pushback. They think, oh, you want me to spend, and let's say you're a city government. It's like, we don't have any money at the city level, or national level government says, oh, well, we're in austerity situation, or etc. One of the things, of course, governments forget is that if you spend in the area of housing, you actually save in so many other areas. We know this because of the relationship between housing and health, for example. So you have better health outcomes if you have better housing. So you use the hospital system less. And of course, there's all those things. There's also states generally misunderstand what can be done immediately to make things better on the housing front, that it doesn't always require money. It could require different legislation, different policy that doesn't cost anything to enact. There are some really good examples of holding governments accountable. And some are going to be, it's contextual in a way, because in some places using law, for example, and courts is really an effective way. So for example, I did a country mission to Nigeria and met with a group there called Just Empower. They're doing amazing work with paralegals and using the court system to prevent evictions, to have the Constitution read in a way that promotes the right to housing. And they've been quite successful. There's then a gap between getting a successful judgment and ensuring that judgment is enforced. So again, an enforcement issue, but at least, they're using the law. In South Africa as well, the law and courts is where people turn immediately. It's part of their culture as a vehicle for realizing the right to housing. If I look at what you're doing in Germany, there's been a kind of quasi approach in a way. You've done incredible grassroots building, and there's a grassroots movement to ensure the right to housing. I think originally when I learned about Berliners taking to the street, it wasn't so much about the right to housing, but it was very consistent with the right to housing. More recently, I've started to hear more human rights language coming into the Berliners movement, which I'm really happy for. But then there's also a litigation element, hasn't there been, where it was the rent freeze legislation was at the Berlin level was challenged through the courts, and it has gone through a legal proceeding. So it's sort of a hybrid. I do see some interesting things emerging in Canada, for example, where a new mechanism has sort of been established. In law, it's been established. It hasn't rolled out yet because of the pandemic, they say, and so this new mechanism is appointing a federal housing advocate, almost like an ombudsperson, but focused on housing and focused at the national level to deal with national government policies and programs. And then they've also said that they will establish a housing council made up of independent experts who can be reviewing on an ongoing basis systemic issues that arise in the country with respect to housing. And the panel or council and the advocate are to work together. And again, the advocate is only looking at systemic issues, which is, of course, where we would want, not the individual landlord-tenant issues, but the big systemic issues like financialization. So those are just some examples of interesting things going on. And you can see it's all different types of mechanisms. I've recently taken to saying that I think journalists play a really important role in enforcement, actually, because I think governments are sensitive to what gets put out in the public domain. I think private corporations are particularly sensitive. When I went after Achilles, when I was rapporteur, Achilles was very sensitive, not just to my letter that I wrote to them as rapporteur, but to the media attention on the issue. They didn't like that at all. And I'm not saying that has resulted in any change in behavior yet, but together, if we piece together all of these different methods, we can get to better accountability, I think, and enforcement of the right to housing.
Okay, so the idea of the ombudsperson on a general level is very, very interesting, because it seems to be like that the human rights issues can trickle in through different measures. It's not a big weapon that can be trickled in. There's an interesting. Sorry.
Can I just add one thing to that? Another thing I've
Sure.
seen is same idea of an ombuds, but at the local level, which could be really nice. If there was a more immediate mechanism, because people at the local level, like when you're living in your neighborhood, it seems often daunting to go to a court or to go to a federal or national ombudsperson. But if you went to your city council or your city government and had access to an ombudsperson there, it might be easier. So just to say, and I'm seeing that movement as well.
We have a very interesting question now, which relates to what you were saying before. You said that you're talking to people, on the government level, to government officials about human rights, and you said they are kind of not really responding to it. So the question is kind of, if I'm trying to relate it in the right way, is what do they say to you if they're rejecting your claim? This is a human rights, but they're at the same time they're supporting investors. What do you say to them, and what do they say to you? Sorry.
Very rarely will a government say to me point blank, housing's not a human right, because they know, like, I'm there and international law codifies it. And so they rarely will say that. Normally, I try to get on very agreeable ground with governments. So we all can agree that homelessness is egregious, that homelessness is a violation of so many human rights, not just the right to housing, although obviously the right to housing, but also just a more general principle of dignity in human rights, health and human rights, etc. So often I can get some agreement there. I've been surprised that governments are quite open to discussing financialization of housing with me. Some have expressed real concern themselves. I was in New Zealand on mission, and the government of New Zealand was very concerned about the way financialization was developing there. It's different there. It's actually individual owners, but will own 20 houses or buildings or apartments. I heard that yesterday that's not uncommon in parts of Europe as well. So I hopped in a taxi cab when I was in New Zealand, and I was talking to the driver, and he ended up telling me he alone, taxi driver, owned 4 properties. So common. So the governments are often interested in the conversation. Where it becomes more complicated is getting them to do something about it. And then there we don't always agree on what should be done. And I think that's because of the interests at stake and the relationship to economies. So that's where the work has to be done. But that's just work that has to be done. So I don't take it when I'm talking to governments and they're not agreeing with me that they should, for example, close the tax benefits of real estate investment trusts, that would cool real estate investment trust right away, because the reason you create an REIT or a REIT is because of the preferential tax basis. But we just have to keep having those conversations, and the people are always right. Tenants are always right. So human rights are right.
Right. So I think we have some time for some more questions. Is that right? Yeah, right. Maybe related to this, there's one idea from one participant maybe. So he asks, or she asks, is it generally necessary for pension funds to openly share information about their investors to their clients? So that's an interesting question. So maybe, would this change the kind of investment policy of pension funds if they would have to share all this information? And is this, for example, an idea you were discussing also with governments about?
Yeah, so I haven't done enough research on legislative frameworks for pension funds around the world, and that is actually one of my, as I'm looking forward to the next year, that's one of the things I want to actually focus on. I think transparency is a huge issue, not just with pension funds. I mean, just as your work showed the need for transparency. I didn't know, actually, for example, that in Germany you couldn't get access to land registry. I find that phenomenal. And so, I mean, it's the same sort of issue as lack of transparency with pension funds. I do think that would put pressure on pension funds. But you have to think of it this way, to the person who asked the question. You have to believe and understand that there would be some pushback if you were investing in Blackstone real estate or Vonovia or one of these asset management firms. And I'm not convinced we're quite there yet in terms of public pushback against investment in residential real estate. So we need to educate the public more so that when there's transparency and you see, oh my God, they're investing in Blackstone, you have that, oh, that's bad. And that would put pressure on the pension fund. That's why we made the film Push. Well, why Frederick Gertten made the film Push and why I was very happy to be part of it, because I think we need this kind of education, and the film Push, really, that's what it goes to. And that's what we at The Shift are trying to do too, is to engage a different consciousness around this.
Yeah, so speaking about the film Push, we also have one question of one participant relating to the session yesterday when the film Push was being showed. The question is the following. In the film, we see various mayors meeting to discuss how to establish housing as a human right. Are there further developments of that meeting in terms of policy making? So this is also like a very important point, because we saw there was the Barcelona Manifesto, and we saw there's a lot of efforts in bringing all these people together, or on the mayor level. But the question is, what do they really do besides, like having a nice meeting? So is there any hope for...
Yeah, I'm really happy for that question. This is the area of my work I'm super excited about, to be honest. So, we have to understand that change happens incrementally. So you start by gathering mayors. That in and of itself is a huge accomplishment. Let's be honest. It's not that easy to get a whole bunch of mayors in one room from around the world. And you get them to talk about the same thing, the housing crisis. And then you get them to understand that they're in the domain of human rights, and they too have human rights obligations as city level government. And from there, you get them to sign a declaration or a manifesto or, whatever. And then you say, okay, it's still not enough. We have to do more. And that's the stage I'm at now with my work with cities. So now I'm moving into the area where we start working very concretely with cities about what it looks like to actually do the right to housing. What does it look like for a city to have a right to housing policy at the city level? And what are the different aspects of that? So last week or 2 weeks ago, actually, I had another gathering of mayors from different, housing wasn't all mayors. Some were deputy mayors working in the area of housing from London and Barcelona, and I think New York was there. I can't remember all of the actors. And we started to talk a little more in depth about the human right to housing at the city level. In Canada, I have a project where it's a demonstration project, it's like a pilot project, where I'm going to be working with 4 cities who will agree to try to introduce the human right to housing into their city policymaking around housing. So then we'll really start seeing how useful is that framework? What changes does it lead to? And from there we can start evaluating and assessing. So, of course, change takes a long time, but this is the kind of work I think that's really valuable and could make a huge difference. So, and that's that's what the Shift. That's a big project of the Shift. So that's what we intend to. One of the things we intend to do is to keep working closely with cities.
Okay, but and the UN rapporteur, the new one, will do this as well, hopefully.
I hope so. I mean, the rapporteur will set his own course. He will certainly be engaged in conversations with national level governments. Every rapporteur is different. I put a real focus on city level government in my rapporteurship for a variety of reasons. It was the first report I wrote was about city level human rights obligations and or local government obligations. I was quite concerned because housing's been downloaded to the city level or decentralized to the city level. And so that for me was hugely important. And I can't speak for my successor, unfortunately.
So there was also like a question which is relating a little bit to the who owns the city investigation, but which relates to also to the topic we just talked about. So where do you think Hamburg, so it's a question maybe for me, but we can also discuss it. Where do you think Hamburg would rank among the 9 cities you have covered regarding housing ownership concerns? Interesting question, because it relates very much to what you are saying. So Hamburg is a city which, from the mayor level, talks a lot about tackling the housing crisis, and it tries to develop new programs to be more sustainable, to, for example, that you cannot build a building without ensuring that 30 or 40% of the apartments are social apartments.
Yep.
But everyone you talk to who observes how the city looks like from the perspective of the tenants, they still say, it's an awful situation. So there's not much change, even though the city or from the mayor side, they're taking steps. So from our observation, I think Hamburg is among the cities which are pressured very much, most in Germany. On the other hand, there's a lot of action taking. So maybe this is a nice example for a question to you, saying, how long does change take? So what is actually the hope for you? Do we talk in years, or do we talk actually in decades when we talk about structural changes of the housing market?
Yeah, well, I mean, if you root financialization in its true place, which is neoliberalism, then that took successive years. So neoliberalism probably started in the late 70s, with Reagan and Thatcher and Pinochet, I suppose. And then, the 80s and 90s cemented neoliberalism, allowing for, when the global financial crisis to happen, allowing for financialization. I actually think the pandemic is a point in time. It's such a unique point in time when we could, in fact, make decades of change overnight. I think it presents itself as that kind of opportunity. So it's very interesting to me about inclusionary zoning. I think someone, maybe my successor rapporteur, could do something about this, but I think it would be interesting to study whether inclusionary zoning is actually effective. That's what you talked about in Munich, where you say, any new build, 30 to 40% of the units have to be affordable, or deeply affordable, or social. I would be interested to know, I think, every city that has inclusionary zoning uses almost the same percentage, which suggests to me that is something that works on the development side, but isn't actually related to need. Because it can't be that in the city of London, they have the same need for social housing as in Hamburg. Like, I would think the numbers would be different, right? Or another city in Cairo, for example. So that suggests that policy is something that developers will go for. And so that's why we do it like that. So it's, I don't know that inclusionary zoning is actually that progressive. I think it's a good one small little move, but I don't think it's that progressive. I think right now, because of the pandemic, there are going to be a lot of cheap assets, let's call them that. Not all of them will be housing, but could they be repurposed into social and deeply affordable housing? So office buildings, for example, I'm quite sure we're going to see a lot of empty office buildings and office buildings for sale, because I think the work from home is going to be a reality on an ongoing. I mean, one always looks to the big tech firms to see what's the future, right? In so many ways. And the big tech firms are saying that they're going to introduce work from home on a permanent basis. And so there goes huge office buildings. So could national and city level governments move in, purchase those, and repurpose them? And that could be a game changer. I mean, that could really change the housing crisis. It could address homelessness. I maintain that homelessness should have been eliminated as a result of this pandemic, period. And I think it is possible. So I think that the threat of the vulture funds, as we'll call them that for this purpose, is really huge right now. And I think governments are quite aware in a way that they were not in '08. Right? It was a new thing in '08, what they did. '09, it happened after in 2012. Now there's no excuse because we've all been talking about this for many years now. We've made it public. There's this conference happening right now, so there's no excuse. So I do think that we could escalate change that would normally take much longer.
So maybe that's a momentum, and the momentum is triggered much more by the ongoing crisis, for better or for worse. But maybe now there's time to act on various levels. And I'm very, very thankful that you opened many windows today, especially with taking this big chunk of a human right, bring this into debate and bring this, and I think this can be brought into life by the small authorities, small local communities, but also like on the national level, because we see in Germany, there's so many levels involved in the housing markets, but they all have to be pressured by many people on different levels. So I would like to thank you, everyone who actually participated in this conversation, which was very, very great. And still, I think the organization of this conference did a wonderful job to make this possible. I think this is the highest value, that you actually made this possible. And thank you, Leilani, that you were live in Ottawa, and we would love to continue this. Everyone knows about Shift now. Everyone knows about CORRECTIV a little bit more, and we would like to continue this. Again, thank you very much.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
Yeah, also from our side, thank you very much, both of you, Leilani and Justus, for this great keynote and conversation. And also, we just wanted to mention that for anybody who wants to watch back your videos and also other videos of the participants at the conference, we will be making them available online. So we will upload them all tomorrow, together with all the other videos of the participants also of yesterday. So these are not only the videos that we showed today, but there are also other in-depth videos that some of the other participants recorded. So this was an additional editorial project that we did as complementary to the conference. So you can already see the videos now when you go to our website, disruptionlab.org/evicted-videos. But otherwise, keep an eye out on our channels. We'll also post about it tomorrow. And then before we close the session, I would also just like to say again that we will be screening the documentary Push this summer. So we're very happy that we are able to do an outdoor screening on the 30th of July at Akut Macht Neu in Berlin Mitte. So we're very excited then that we can show actually the whole film, as we wanted to do also originally. And then, right after this session, there will be a break. But please come back on time, because at 7:10 we will have actually the premiere of the short film Steal This Poster, Artivism and the Struggle of Lucha y Siesta by the Steal This Poster Subvertising Collective from Italy and the UK. And after that, at 7:30, we will continue with the panel Resisting Speculation, Ecological Commons, Subvertising and Fighting Tech Domination, which is the final panel of today. So thanks again, everyone, and hope to see you back soon.
Thank you.